of government, Ahmadinejad, Musawi instead of Ahmadinejad, rather than regime change. So there is a rationality here, I think, which should be taken into account.
Thank you.
Johnny Dillon. I'm a broadcaster, but I'm as independent today. My question is to Carol, as a Latina all the way from Venezuela, how you got in contact with the Kurds to write such a book. The second question is, what is your resources, what is your fact-finding to make this book so important as resources for the others? Thanks.
Well, my story begins I was a student doing my doctorate in Paris. I was studying literature. I had begun writing for a Venezuelan newspaper, and I went to the Film Cannes Festival. And there I had the opportunity of meeting Yilmaz Güney, who is a Kurdish from Turkey filmmaker, who was nominated for the Cannes Golden Palm. And I went as a translator because Yilmaz's translator did not speak English, and the British journalist who invited me did not speak French. And at the end of the interview, I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yes, of course." And the first thing I said is, "I'm not British. I'm from Venezuela." And that changed the whole thing. He said, "Venezuela, Latin America, the third world, solidarity. Why did you not tell me this from the beginning? The interview would have changed." It wasn't my interview. It was a British guy's interview. But the fact is, he asked for my contact information, and they contacted me a couple of weeks after he had won the Golden Palm, and I began to work with him. And it's through him that I met the Kurdish diaspora in Paris, the Kurdish Institute, and it's in the Kurdish Institute that I met Ghassemlou. And by then, I was quite immersed in the problem. And as a Latin American, what impacted me of the Kurdish problem was that this is the largest nation in the world without a state. That really struck me. And then learning more about the history and the ongoing oppression and brutality and the silence of the international media. When I met Ghassemlou in 1983, there was very little spoken about the Kurds. So I put my grain of salt by writing about the Kurds. And Ghassemlou invited me to Kurdistan, and I went there to do a documentary for a French television agency, Gamma TV, on the Iranian Kurds. And thus began my contact with them. And as I said before, once he was assassinated, I knew that the book was not about the Kurds. It needed to be about him because it had been an enormous loss for the Kurds. Really, the impact of the death of Ghassemlou is enormous. I don't know when there will be a leader of the stature of this man. Not only did he understand his culture, and he was able to have a clear message and speak to the desires and the hopes of the Kurds, but he was also a spokesperson for the West. He was a bridge between the Kurds and the West because he was a moderate man. He had a vision of a democracy that was very rare in that era. So he really became the symbol of a possibility of democracy within the region. So it was a great loss. So the need to write the book was that. And the Kurds is an important book for the Kurds, and basically it's the Kurdish people who are bringing the book forward. And I hope also that the Americans will be interested. Thank you.
Lloyd McCoy, Department of Defense. Could you characterize the relationship between the Kurdish opposition groups in Iran and the senior leaders of the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq, specifically Talabani and Barzani, and what sort of support you all are receiving?
Well, as I said before, there's always been a relationship between various Kurdish political parties from both sides or all sides of the borders, and in particular, the relationship between the Iraqi Kurds and the Iranian Kurds is very interesting because Carol mentioned that Talabani was a very, very close friend of Dr. Ghassemlou. And they were together abroad, so pretty much their history goes back quite a long time. So that personal relationship added to the relationship between the various political parties, and that's one aspect of it. But also at times the PUK led by Mr. Talabani and the KDP led by Masoud Barzani, they've always crossed the border. So I mean, because of the geopolitics of the area between Iraq and Iran and the Kurdish areas, there's always been, at times, confrontations, but most of the times, cooperations, because the Iranian Kurds were getting at least some sort of help from the Iraqi government, at least to use Iraq as a base against the Iranian government, and the Iraqi Kurds were doing the same thing, using Iran as a base against the Iraqi government. So, but again, the relationship goes back to the fact that yes, both sides knew that they have to use the central government in both sides to advance their interest, but again, without really sacrificing the interest of each side. So if the Iranian Kurds had a relationship with the Iraqi government, that relationship had to be not at the expense of the Iraqi Kurds, and the Iraqi Kurds were doing the same thing. At times, for example, PUK led by Mr. Talabani, the current president of Iraq, was at sometimes in the early revolutions, 1980s, was helping our party to fight the Iranian regime. So there have been cases where, or we have when PUK was fighting the Iraqi government at that time, we were taking PUK members to Baghdad as our members so they can be treated. So there's been always a lot of cooperation, and that cooperation still exists to date. But again, Iran is pressuring the Iraqi Kurds very much to expel, to limit their activities in Iranian Kurdistan, whether it's through cross-border or whether it's through activities that in propaganda or media activities. So Iran is very much concerned, but again, the Iraqi Kurds have been very instrumental in many ways in helping the opposition groups, and especially the Iranian Kurdish opposition groups. So.
Idris, would you like to comment on that? Or? No. Okay. Final question? Well, I want to thank our distinguished guests, Sharif, Carol, and Idris, for an amazing overview of Iranian Kurds. We're going to have a book signing right here. Carol will be signing her books, and they're selling for $23.